The tone of our first interview with Steve Newmark got off to a bit iffy start when we noticed him casing Pod World headquarters, potentially to steal some memorabilia. Good news, it turns out, Steve Newmark, you have a lot of this stuff already.
Well, no doubt. When you grow up in Chapel Hill, you get indoctrinated in this and you collect stuff. And when you're as old as I am and have gone through as much iterations of Carolina athletics, you've started to collect stuff. I've had many times when I've been told that my house doesn't need to be just decorated with Carolina gear, that's not the right fashion statement, or nor is it appropriate for a 54-year-old just to have that. I've had people come into my house before and say, this looks like a college dorm room. So trying to dial it back, although that's what this looks like in here, although and it's more appropriate. I will note, and Jones, you and I actually met, obviously, I think on my second day when I was watching you hold court in the room with all the athletic department. And this is our first time meeting, but I did listen to you guys on Friday, and I heard you make the comment that your big hope with this transition in the athletic department is that the first thing that we do with all this new revenue we're going to generate is come over here and give you 24-karat gold-plated walls.
That's right,
and
right here in Pod World headquarters.
You and I had not met before, and in my mind, I was thinking the first thing that came to mind is Adam really just Austin Powers, the Mike Myers character? So I was expecting to come in here and for you to have kind of a velour jacket and a lava lamp, but I'm grateful that that's not exactly the direction that you've gone in here.
That's on Fridays.
Yeah, you caught him on a good day
right.
with his attire today. Of course, Steve Newmark, new to Carolina, at least in his current role. Let me make sure I get it. Deputy Associate Athletic Director, is that right for this year,
and
Steve?
I'm embarrassed to say I'm not big on titles, so I'm not exactly certain what we put in the transition title. So I think we'll just say that I'm in the athletic department. Yeah. I'm going to have an opportunity to kind of really learn from the existing staff and Bubba, and then I'll transition into the athletic director role in July.
And, of course, we had Bubba in here in early July to announce this transition and where Carolina was heading with this role. So, Steve, kind of take us through. I mean, I want to get a lot into your background and a lot of stuff, but how did this come about? How did someone who has not had a role in college athletics previously, how did this come about?
Sure. So if we look at, I think I mentioned I grew up here, and I'm happy to talk about that. I'm sure we've got a lot of mutual stories that we can cover there. But if you look at my professional career, I've been in racing and NASCAR for the last 15 years, but prior to that, I was in the college space, but more on the media rights, TV deals, whether it was Southeastern Conference, Conference USA, NCAA. And throughout that period, I also kind of maintained fairly close ties to a lot of folks in Chapel Hill. The Bedore family, the group that I've been very close to, Dick Bedore's known me since I was 3 and growing up here, and so I was always somewhat connected. And then if we fast forward to kind of what's happened in the last few years, which I think we're all aware, there's been a transition in college sports as there are certain attributes that look more like professional sports. And so I think it was a year ago this spring, Dean Jordan from Wasserman, who was a big player in the sports world, very influential, had a lot of different roles, and like many of us is a diehard Carolina guy, had come to me and said, hey, I would like to get a group together to just provide some guidance and advice to the UNC athletic department about some of the challenges and what's coming down the pipe with this professionalization of certain components of the sports world. So there was a group of us that started talking through that, was introduced to Bubba. Bubba brought some of his staff down to our race shop really to talk about how you generate revenue, what the sponsorship world looks like in the professional context. I've also known Chancellor Roberts for quite a long time, and so I had a relationship there. That just kind of evolved into I was on the search committee, the selection committee for the football coach, and that was an interesting experience for me. Obviously, I think we ended up in a great place when you can get arguably the greatest coach in football history to come to Chapel Hill. And so we kind of worked very closely through that process. I think it was well documented that there was some twists and turns in that process, but we ended up in a good place. And then ultimately, I think it was last December, Bubba came down to Charlotte, and because we had been working together closely and started sharing his vision for the athletic department going forward, and started asking, would there be a way that we think we could work together, and would I be interested in moving from Charlotte to Chapel Hill and taking a role within the athletic department. So that's very kind of the short version of how this evolved.
Let's put this into some context for people who may not know your story. You were on Franklin Street in 1982?
So I again grew up in Chapel Hill, grew up in Colony Woods, and it was a much smaller community than it is now. But Mike Roberts was down the street, the Bedores were behind us, Doug Moe's mom was kind of catty corner, the Guthridges were a street over, and so really it was a very small community that everybody lived together and worked together. I can probably track my development as from childhood to an adult based on Carolina games. And I'm not alone in that. I understand there's been people who have written books literally tracking it, but I can remember, 1977, that's like my first memory of watching my dad be despondent and get upset when we lose to Marquette. You learn about politics in 81 when you're watching the national championship and the president gets shot, which then delays the game. Thankfully, we win in 82. I get to be on my dad's shoulders on Franklin Street watching the celebration. I watched all the students at the time paint the street blue, and then I proceeded to watch all the alcohol that was consumed also spill on the road and dissolve all of the blue paint that had been on the road. So life learning lessons there. And then you kind of fast forward, and I look over the years. I was able to take my dad to his first national championship. I've taken both of my kids to it, been with close childhood friends at different games over the years. And some of it's been great when we've won, and then there's been heartbreak when, we lose in San Antonio by quite a bit to Kansas. And, some of those losses sting more than others. But probably like a lot, I've had an unhealthy obsession with Carolina sports. And it's not just basketball, watching what soccer has done over the years. And I think that's been really something that's special. And I think we all recognize that what Carolina athletics does is it's a common thread among family, friends, alumni, and it ties people together. And that's really the beauty of collegiate sports.
And you skipped a test in 93, is that right?
I did. I had always tried to be with my family for Final Four games and been in Chapel Hill. I ended up going to school up in Virginia at College of William and Mary. I had aspirations to play soccer there, ran out of talent before I got there, so ended up not doing that. But we obviously, make the final game in 93 against Michigan. So that's Monday night. I've got a big test on Tuesday, and I'm agonizing on how I go to the professor, and I'm quite frankly trying to concoct some story that seems legitimate about why I need to miss it, and I couldn't come up. I wasn't smart enough to come up with anything, so I finally went in and just sat down and said, I have no valid reason for doing this, but I've watched every Final Four and championship game with my family in Chapel Hill, and I'd really like to do it again. I'd obviously done it the previous year in 92, and he looked at me and he says, my son swam for UNC Frank Comfort, you need to go now. And so maybe a good lesson that honesty sometimes is the best approach. It was not my first course of action of what I tried, but I think that's one of the things I think is so special about Carolina sports is we can pick these different times and games, and it just reinforces the connections that you have with your community.
Were you in New Orleans in 2022?
I was in New Orleans in 2022 for the final game.
I don't remember that game.
Yeah,
there was a game before that.
I remember the first half, and
that's right.
And so it was. My son is actually in school down there. Again, I thought the stars were aligned. Until that point, I had personally been undefeated in national championship games that I attended, recognizing that I contributed nothing and did nothing other than yell on sidelines. And this was, I think I may have gotten a little cocky in the first half when we were up by 15. And at the end of the day, though, what we really remember about that season is 2 victories over Coach K. So we can just block that. We can block that game out and say the Final Four game and the last game at Cameron, that's what we needed. And I think we'd probably all trade that for almost anything else.
You may not know the answer to this question. What do you think this next year is going to be like for you? Like what's happening on a day-to-day basis? I can't imagine you're just like walking behind Bubba everywhere he goes. So what is it that you're trying to learn?
I think that would bother him. I think that would disturb him a little bit. So
how do you kind of learn from him this year?
Well, I think it's beyond just learning from him. I think that if you look at the history of UNC athletics, we've always had an unbelievable athletic department. And there are a lot of folks that you guys know very well that have been anchors for this organization for a long time. So I think what has been really nice is that I've been welcomed with open arms. And so I'm trying to absorb as much as I can on areas that I didn't have as much exposure to. Compliance. Bubba and I have a very close relationship. And again, that was a key factor in my decision to try to transition from the NASCAR world and the professional sports world. And so, really this year, it's going to be working with Rick Barakat, who's come on board, who is fantastic. I know he was on your show, and I think you hear his passion and his ideas on how he can help elevate what we're doing for game day experiences. And so, from my perspective, hopefully there's some value that I can add based on my history and some of the things that I've seen out there, but it's really going to be just learning from Bubba. And, he and I are talking daily and I think working, and he's really embraced it, and I appreciate that.
What are the advantages and the disadvantages when you grow up loving something like you did and do Carolina athletics, then when you have to transition into, okay, now this is my business?
Sure. I think it's, when I was trying to crystallize in my mind what some of the bigger challenges were going to be for me, there's kind of probably a personal one and a professional one. On the personal side, for the last, 15, 20 years, I've been in the sports world, but it's been my occupation. And when I go to events, whether it's races or a match at Liverpool or a game at Fenway, because they're all in the same corporate umbrella where I've worked for the last 15 years, I had to at least have a show of decorum and maybe be a little stoic. And you needed not to be a fan, right? You needed to be professional in how you operated. On the flip side, for my entire life, my outlet for showing that passion and dedication has been Carolina sports. Whether, I'm watching a women's field hockey game on ESPNU at home getting nervous, or whether it's being in Boschmer watching the baseball team, I could be that fan and, cheer and yell. And so on the personal side, I got to make sure that I need to transition, and that when I'm at the Smith Center, I show the proper reservation, and I would rather not be the first AD in UNC history to get thrown out of a game for voicing my displeasure from a call on the court. I think that probably wouldn't show very well for what. So that'll be a transition for me, is that you need to make that. You can still be a fan, but you have to understand that my primary role now is to serve the institution, make sure we're good steward of UNC athletics, and that represents the university well. From a professional perspective, having this history, I do feel the weight of the responsibility, because UNC athletics is something that I think is well beyond what you see in professional sports. It is something that ties generations of families, it ties alumni, it ties this community, and it is the most visible part of the flagship institution in North Carolina. And so we really need to be good stewards of that, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants, particularly in the athletic department. I mean, so many legendary coaches, and then even the athletic directors. I was here when Swafford came on board and built the foundation. As I mentioned, Dick Bedore, who I have so much admiration and respect. I mean, the integrity, and he has reinforced every time I've talked to him that the two of the most important things that we should be focused on is the educational mission of this institution, and that's why athletics exists, and serving our coaches. And that we have, with 28 programs, we have some of the most incredible coaches who go above and beyond and do more. And so then obviously you transition to the third piece of that triumvirate, that kind of iconic triumvirate in the athletic world, which is Bubba Cunningham, and you look at just the statistics of how many national championships have come under his watch. And so I think what we need to do is make sure that we continue that tradition. You guys may remember these old posters. Back in the day, you had the one with Worthy on it that said the tradition of excellence. Mm-hmm. And then a few years later, it came out and said the tradition continues, and it's Jordan. And I kind of feel like that's what we need to be doing, is we need to be honoring the past, making sure we're true to what, I guess we'll say the founders of our sports group have built, but then making sure we're evolving and adapting to the new world order to ensure that we can be elite across the board and we can protect everything that's special about the UNC DNA.
How we do that? How do we evolve in this new world of college athletics?
So with the disclaimer that I think I've been on the job for 7 days, so I don't want to be.
You don't have every answer.
I don't want to be so presumptuous and say. But I think that we have all the tools and resources here. I mean, you guys understand. Everybody understands how special this place is. You just walk around campus and you see it, and the tradition and the history, and the family. like many who grew up during my era, you looked at Dean Smith was a role model, and he did everything with class and integrity, and those were his core values and his principles, and it was always his players first and trying to be there for the student athlete. But on the flip side, and this is something I think gets lost at times, he was an innovator and he was an entrepreneur. And I've had discussions with Coach Williams, with Phil Ford and others just about how Dean operated, because I was obviously just in the stands like this on the sideline and they were in the middle of it. And I think that's something that we forget, is that what he did is he looked and said, all right, I may not like all of the rules, but these are what the rules are. And we're going to figure out how to make UNC the best it can be and to be elite. And I think that's really what we need to do. I mean, there's clearly rules as the world has evolved that may not be exactly what I would have liked. I mean, shoot, I'm old school enough that I liked when the ACC was 8 teams and we had a Big Four tournament. But that's not the way it works now. So let's figure out what the rules are and go out and let's make sure that our coaches and players are equipped to go out and beat everybody else and continue to unite the UNC fan base. To do that, we are going to have to probably do some things that make us a little bit uncomfortable, because that's the way we've got to generate revenue in order to support that.
Uncomfortable how?
I just think probably with branding. Now, of course, everybody who knows my background, and I loved some of the memes out there of the football uniforms that look like a NASCAR uniform with logos all over it. I promise you that I shouldn't promise anything, but my view is that that's not the direction we're going. But we do need to think about how we can evolve. I mean, I think there's a lot of people uncomfortable with the House settlement and the fact that we're paying players. Now, I think it's a misnomer that we've become professional sports. The demise of college athletics hasn't happened. We have almost 800 athletes. Very few of them are actually, getting paid. They're still enjoying the traditional collegiate experience where they come on campus, they make new friends, probably have some angst and anxiety like we all did of relocating from home and doing all this. And so we've not become a professional sports team. I've operated in professional sports. The athletes that we had there were worried about, making sure their 401ks and going home and taking care of their family. And that's very different than what our student athletes experience today. But that said, there is a lot more money flowing into collegiate athletics than there was 20, 30 years ago. Our budget is bigger. Now, one of the nice things, I view collegiate athletics and UNC athletics as kind of a marketing arm for the overall university. Because at the end of the day, our goal, and I know Chancellor Roberts said this, is to be the premier public institution from an educational perspective in the country. And so really what athletics should be doing is figuring out how we serve that greater mission. And so we need to be out representing the university well. To do that, we need to generate revenue in order to sustain ourselves. And so that's really when I say there's probably stuff that makes everybody uncomfortable because it's just different. But the core mission and the core purpose of having student athletes come on campus and have an experience and figure out what their major is going to be. There's other components that are different than the normal student here, but overall it's still the collegiate experience.
You mentioned you've only been on the job a week, and obviously you know this place. But as you've been on the job for a week and seen it from a different perspective, what's surprised you?
I think internally what has surprised me, and this ties into what I just mentioned, is how much of there is an academic focus in everything that we do. And I think the headlines that we read out there in sports media is about the settlement and the rev share and how much money is going here and there. But when I sit in meetings on a day-to-day basis, at least for the last week, what really jumps out at you is how the whole athletic department is focused on making sure all the student athletes have the support they need to excel in the classroom. And there's all sorts of support services that are put in place, and there's a focus on making sure these students, if they have shown aspirations in a particular area, that they can thrive and be able to do that. And that's something that I don't think most people see, with how much time is spent on ensuring that these almost 800 student athletes get both a great academic experience and are also have a real student college life that a lot of us experienced when we went through it.
You mentioned your history in sports media and dealing with some relationships there. How can that be beneficial to Carolina's athletic department in your mind moving forward?
My hope is that I'll be able to contribute alongside the very talented staff that we have by bringing a little bit different perspective, because I've seen, I've kind of grown up in the Fenway organization with Fenway Sports Group, for those who don't know, has become kind of a global sports empire. It's the Boston Red Sox, Liverpool over in the English Premier League, Pittsburgh Penguins, Boston Common Golf and the Tomorrow Golf League. They control a lot of the PGA. LeBron James is an investor. And so I've been able to learn and absorb a lot of, see how a lot of very, luminaries in the sports world operate and how they run a team. And we are going to have attributes of professional sports. We're not transitioning all the way there, but we're going to need to adopt some of those best practices. And I'm hoping that will give me some insight that I can share, and we can talk about, here's a new creative way to look at this, particularly as we are marketing our student athletes in a way that we hadn't before. And then obviously what I mentioned earlier, working with some of the other conferences in the NCAA, hopefully as we look at the landscape that we're going to be faced, which is what are TV rights, what are our conferences going to look like in the future, that hopefully I'll have a little bit of insight that might be a bit different that I can throw into the mix, that we can try to get to the right result.
Some of the properties you mentioned are not just national brands, but global brands. And I think we're all familiar with you're wearing a Carolina shirt in some weird place, and you don't expect anybody to know the Tar Heels, and then somebody walks by and says, "Go Heels." How does Carolina athletics go from a very good college brand that everyone in America knows to being on the verge of being a global type brand like that gets even bigger? Well,
the first step I'd recommend to you is maybe go out and hire the greatest coach in NFL history. And so
step one complete. Yeah, there we go.
But I share with you, I was in one of my sons was doing a semester abroad in Croatia last year, and we were over in a small town in Croatia, and somebody walked by in a UNC sweatshirt, and I just assumed, okay, they're probably like us, a tourist that had been over there, and we tried to engage in a conversation, and when they didn't speak English, but it was very clear that it was because the Carolina brand carries weight globally, and we may not appreciate it because we're focused on what goes on in Chapel Hill, but I think that's a huge opportunity for us. And obviously, we have Michael Jordan to thank for that in large part, but it's not just him. You go down the list. It's Mia Hamm. It's Lawrence Taylor. The number of athletes that have come out of this university that have continued to be loyal ambassadors is beyond anything that I've actually seen in professional or collegiate athletics. And so we need to leverage that and take advantage of that. And not just in the U.S., but globally. And that's not going to happen overnight. But if we want to get to where we want to be, which is year over year elite in football, basketball, top 5, top 10 teams, as well as, and this is really important to me because I believe it's part of the UNC DNA, it's the other 26 sports as well. There's a lot of schools in the country that have made the decision they don't need to support as many Olympic sports as we do. So you look at some of the schools and other conferences, they're 19 or 20. We're 28. I don't know exactly what the right number is, but I think it's really critical for us to maintain that, because look at our success, and it's not, we focus on football and basketball because that's where the most revenue comes in from externally. That's just the way our society has evolved. But you look at where our championships are, you look at some of the student athletes and the representatives and the coaches, whether it's Karen Shelton, Jen Levy, these sports are core to who we are. And having that breadth and scope of programs, to me, is absolutely critical going forward. And so we've got to leverage that because it's a differentiator. There's a cost to doing that, but I'm confident that we can figure out a right way so we can maintain our identity.
Man, I wish we've already kept you almost 25 minutes. We could do this for an hour. But what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? What gets your blood pumping right now?
I think what has been most fulfilling in the short term is how many people have so much passion and are willing to spend so much time on UNC. And I look at a lot of the donors, and you just go through the ranks of the Rams Club. A lot of these individuals, these men and women, have been wildly successful in technology and manufacturing and logistics, and they're running businesses that consume all the time, yet their passion is UNC. And they have spent so much time on making sure we have what we need. And you talk to everybody. Now, everybody has different opinions. There's no doubt about that. And so that's going to be an occupational job hazard. But even though there are different opinions on where you put a basketball arena or what conference you're in or how many sports you have, everybody wants the same goal, and they want Carolina to be elite, and they want us to continue to be that unifying bond among generations. And that's a wonderful thing, because you just don't see that all the time. And so the time and energy that I think other folks and alumni and other fans are willing to put into this program, to me, has been just amazing. And that's obviously in a very short window. You can ask me all these questions again in 6 months. We'll see if see if any of the answers are similar. But I'm pretty excited, and then obviously first and foremost, having the whole world of collegiate football focus on Kenan Stadium on Monday night is going to be a real thrill.